Okay. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
For those of you who don't know, my name is Melissa Hardy, and I'm a member both of the church here and also of the Adult Ed Committee, where we have lots of fun. So if anybody wants to join, feel free to see how it works. So I kind of continuing on the whole building blocks theme that Charlie's been talking about throughout, sermons since fall started. In Adult Ed, we thought it'd be great to do a class on Sermon on the Mount, which is sort of known as, the greatest sermon ever, the inaugural sermon of Jesus, and it's sort of the building blocks of Jesus walking through really what it means to be a follower and what those characteristics are. So that's kind of the perspective that we're coming from here. So I'll say this, I walked into this thinking it was going to be a lot easier than it was. Because the Sermon on the Mount, if you look even in the version we've got right here, it's 4 pages long, okay? It's 3 chapters, it's 4 pages. So I was like, bullet points, key points, I'm good. Then I started doing research around it and listening to podcasts and watching sermons from other, pastors, and of course, resourcing the Bible Project, which is my favorite thing ever. And all of a sudden, I was like, there is no way I'm going to get through Sermon on the Mount in one class. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. We're going to cover a couple of the highlights. Excuse me. But there is so much here that it's really going to spark my interest to dig in even further. So I've gone down a very slippery slope in the Sermon on the Mount study. So anyways, today we're going to walk through Sermon on the Mount. I'm not going to underestimate. I basically what I'm going to say is this was definitely more than I thought it was going to be, which I said already. But the reading that I've done and the preparation that I've done, it's actually it's given me a completely different framework on what it means to be a Christian. And that's pretty crazy because I've kind of been in this jam for a while. So I think it was, it's really had a profound impact on me. So hopefully you guys are ready to go along for the ride. And you ask questions, I'm not saying I'm going to have the answers, but we can certainly discuss the questions as they come up. All right. Great. Let's do this. All right, so I want to start, of course I'm coughing now. I want to start with a verse that's actually from later on in the New Testament. But I think what it does is really encapsulate what the vision is and what is shared in Sermon on the Mount. So I'll go ahead and read this. We take on an entirely new way of life, a God-fashioned life, a life renewed from the inside, working itself into your conduct as God accurately reproduces his character in you. So it's really saying this life of living like Jesus is reproducing, we are to be reproducing his character in us. And it is an entirely new way of life. It is from the inside out. It should be impacting our conduct and how we're living on a regular basis. So I liked this just kind of as a starter, because even though it's 4 pages, there's still a lot going on here, so this is your good preview. So a new way of life. What does this actually mean? And what is the inaugural sermon about? So what this sermon does, and really we'll cover this in a second, there's 5 sections to Sermon on the Mount, but in general what this is doing is explaining how to love others as God loved us. How do we do that? That God has always desired that we are holy both from inside and also the outside. That Jesus focused not just on our outward actions, but on the bigger issue, which is the motives of your own heart. And you're the only one who is gonna know what's going on there, so you can sit there and do all of the right things outwardly, but is your heart in the right place? So our thoughts, motives, and desires betray a reality, I love this, that behavior modification cannot cure. That God is looking for righteous outward conduct that flows from a heart of purity, love, and devotion, and that he changes his children from the inside out. You'll hear this a lot. There's the whole upside down kingdom coming from the inside out, changing your heart. A lot of what was in the Old Testament was about rules and actions and things that you had to do. And what he's talking about here is changing your heart from the inside out and really your perspective and your view and how seeing the world and seeing others the way God sees us. Jesus meant this sermon to be lived, not just heard. This isn't a passive listening. So really, the ball's in our court. We need to take action on this. This is 4 pages in the New Testament. It's this skinny little part, but there is so much here. And what I found for myself is the more I looked at it, the more questions I asked, and then the more questions I asked, the more questions I asked, and then asked some more and asked some more. So there's just so much in here. So he's redefining what pleases God via a collection of core values and what is important to him. It also paints a picture of what it looks like to live a righteous life, which sometimes is a little hard to look in the mirror after reading this and say, am I doing any of this? But what we know is that God continues to have grace with us. And so this is going to be an ongoing goal, the ongoing goal of what it looks like to live a righteous life. We just need to keep moving in the right direction and then kind of self-correcting as we go. So I like the last little nugget here, which is seeing as how God forgives us all the time and how patient he is with us in grace as we are continuing to grow and learn. We are encouraged to forgive others the way God forgives us. And that's like one of those phrases that gets thrown out a lot, but I guess thinking about it and taking it in a little differently is thinking of how patient he is with us. One of the podcasts I listened to compared Jesus to a nursing mother. You know, where if you think about the close contact that you have, the eye locking that you have, just the comfort that's being provided, and that really kind of changed a reference for me of thinking about it that way. Of like, here's God, here's Jesus, who is just holding on to us, and as we stumble, like a toddler will do, and as we make mistakes, you know, he's going to pick us up and sort of redirect, which is what we do as parents. So thinking about that in terms of how patient are we with others in forgiving, because we know we're all making mistakes all the time, at least speaking for myself. Okay, so we're going to talk about the structure of Sermon on the Mount. There's 5 sections to it. It starts with the character. So this is probably the part that is most familiar to folks. It's also known as the Beatitudes. It's all the blessed are they who, so mourn, meek, you know, it's all the blessings. basically. So we're going to define that as the character of God's blessed ones. So defining what he would like to see as characteristics of us. The second section is the calling of God's blessed ones. This is God calls us to be the salt and the light. Really tight phrase, but we are called to be the salt and light. And the third section is all about the contrast. And I always think of this as the, you've heard this, but I say. So Jesus goes through this kind of section of saying, like, you've heard, don't murder anyone, which is one of the commandments from the Old Testament. And then it flips to, but I say, if you're angry with someone, that is an equally bad sin. And that's the heart again. It's how you are perceiving things. Murder is the action, anger is the heart. This is also where the Lord's Prayer comes out. So there's my fun fact for the day. Probably 95% of people knew this, but part of this section, in contrast, is also talking about, like, are you doing stuff for show, or are you actually being true and honest and gratitude in your prayer and offering and things like that? And he says, don't sit here and pray theatrically. You can do a simple prayer like this, and then goes into the Lord's Prayer there. And then the fourth section is on the conduct of God's blessed ones. So how should we be acting? And then finally, the counterfeits. So I like they were all C's. So the character, the calling, the contrast, the conduct, and the counterfeits. Like that. And if you're following along, you may notice that the color coding will continue. All right. So I'm just going to give you an overview kind of what we're going to be, how this class is going to go. I'm going to enter each section of each of these sections with a Bible passage that someone's going to read. And then we will do kind of a thought-provoking question. Nobody has to answer it. These are just things for you to think about as we go through each section. So there'll be a question to think about on character, on calling, contrast, conduct, and counterfeits. I'm going to have Chris Turner speak on the first Bible passage, and then we're going to watch our only video of the class. And normally I pack a bunch of videos in, so this was really challenging for me. But it's a 12-minute video, so it is long. But we're going to do that, and then once we kind of go through that, then we'll start actually walking through each of the sections. Okay. All right. Chris, thank you for doing our first reading.
My pleasure. Matthew 5. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Thanks, Chris. So that's the Beatitudes. So what I want to do is provide a video now just to give a little context on the setting, basically. Who was Jesus talking to for this Sermon on the Mount, right? What's the context? What was the environment? Who are the actual, like, what was the life of the people who he was being spoken to? Because that helps tremendously and for me, I think of it as context of putting I can't put myself back in that time, but at least it helped me, it added flavor, let's put it that way. It added flavor to the text that I was reading to think about who he was actually speaking to. So this is my long video, it's 12 minutes. This is part of, I can't not plug this guy, this is Tim Mackey, co-founder of the Bible Project, I think his name. But this is part of a sermon series that he was, that he participated in, that was a 2-year study of the book of Matthew. 2 years. And it's so good that I am halfway through it. I have been YouTubing my way through this guy. So we're going to watch just 12 minutes of 2 years of text, and he does reference a couple things of like, as we talked about last week, so just go with it, okay? All right. And I'm going to start kind of a few minutes in, so this might get a little clunky.
Precisely what I expect. Hey guys, how you doing? Good. Good to have you guys here. Welcome to the Sunday gathering. Here we go. These might be, they might be some of the most familiar words of Jesus to many of you. Some of you might have, grown up with these blessings. What are these? This is Jesus on a mountain talking to a big crowd of people, and he pronounces these 9 blessings. And some of these, are just really ingrained in some of our minds, these really vivid images of peacemaking and hunger and thirst for righteousness and being poor in spirit. So if we actually try and explain it to somebody else, most of us actually have no clue what any of those things mean, but they sound nice, because Jesus said them. And I think these blessings, they're called the Beatitudes, which comes from the Latin word for blessing or being fortunate, which is where that name comes from. But they don't actually seem that difficult to understand, do they? Jesus has this people, and he starts talking to them by pronouncing these blessings on them, and for being merciful and meek, or gentle and pure in heart. And those are good things that Jesus wants us to be like. And so he pronounces a blessing upon them. It's pretty simple. I don't think I need to say more, I guess, right? Because it's so simple. So you're right, it's actually not complicated. But these 9 blessings that Jesus opens up with are not complicated in a similar way like a swimming pool is not complicated. you get in it, and immediately, like, it's intuitive, you're wet, right? And you get in the shallow end maybe, and it's very like, yes, a swimming pool, precisely what I expect. And then maybe you take a few steps, and you ask some questions, like, what on earth does it mean to be poor in spirit? What does that mean? And who said meek in any conversation in the last year? Like, what does that word mean? And then you ask some questions, then you're like, well, the pool is actually to my waist now. And you take a few more steps, and you're like, why does Jesus pronounce a blessing on people who cry a lot, right? Who mourn? Isn't that something I generally don't enjoy doing? And why is he blessing people who get beat up? Isn't that something I would want to avoid in most scenarios? And then you're up to your neck now. And then you're like, why? What does it mean to be blessed in the first place? Blessed by whom? Blessed for what purpose? Blessed with what result? And who is he even saying these things to in the first place? And why does he begin one of his most famous collections of teaching with these 9 blessings? And then you're waiting, and all of a sudden you realize the pool's 12 feet deep. That's my experience with the Beatitudes, and I just help you recreate it right there. And so in my mind, these sayings there's more than meets the eye. And they might seem a little bit kind of harmless or benign. You know, what's dangerous about 9 blessings, you say, over people. But these 9 blessings, I'm convinced, are actually deeply challenging. And if we hear them rightly, I think they have the potential to actually completely turn upside down your view of yourself and of God and of other people. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to walk into the deep end of the pool and explore these. And actually, the first question, to me, the most helpful question that really began to unlock for me the deep end of the pool is a question that you don't need to know a lick of ancient history. You don't need to know any other languages other than English to ask this question and answer it. And I think if you ask this question and answer it, and you keep asking it, every line through these blessings, I think is deeply profound. It unlocks everything. And the question is simply this: who is Jesus saying these 9 blessings to, and on what occasion? I guess that's two questions, right? That was one, 2 questions. So who is Jesus talking to? And in what setting or what context is he doing that? And asking that question actually might highlight something that's very, very common. These 3 chapters of Matthew 5, 6, and 7, they're the most famous collection of Jesus' teachings. They're called the Sermon on the Mount in church history. And many people who primarily see Jesus as a moral teacher tend to lift these 3 chapters out of their context in Matthew and treat it like a little pamphlet. This is like the ethics of Jesus in summary. This is ethics light with Jesus, or something like that. And if you do that, I'm pretty convinced you'll really misunderstand what Jesus is trying to do in these 3 chapters. Because Matthew has placed them, he's placed chapter 5 after what chapter? 4.
Good job, guys.
Because ethical teaching was one of the things that Jesus did, but only trying to flesh out the implications and how we should respond to what his core message was all about. And if you were here last week, we explored that. What is Jesus' core message? You would for sure hear him talking about this on any given day that you're going to teach. It's about the kingdom. Look, I even left the words up from last week. So when you think of Jesus, think of the kingdom. Because look at chapter 4, Matthew 4, and we're going to focus on 5, but just remember chapter 4. Look at chapter 4, verse 17. Jesus comes onto the public stage, and Matthew, thank you, Matthew, he has summarized the whole message of Jesus in one little sentence to make sure you don't miss the main idea. What's it about? Matthew 4, verse 17. Hey, repent. Everybody, pay attention. Turn around. The kingdom of heaven has come near. So this is what we explored last week. The kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven is the storyline of the whole Bible, and about how humans have both rebelled and ruined ourselves, each other, and God's world. And God has set in line a whole set of promises in the story of the Old Testament scriptures to lead up to this promise that he would one day come among his people as king and reclaim his rightful rule and reign over his people. And Jesus claimed that that's what was happening, and it was happening in himself and in what he was saying and in what he was doing. And he was utterly convinced that it was good news. It was really good news. And so what does Jesus do? He comes and announces the king and the kingdom and so on. And then what's the first thing? This is last week. What's the first thing Jesus did after that? Remember? He went for a walk on the lake. Right? Very typical of Jesus. And he runs into these fishermen. Right? There's no-name fishermen. And what does he say to them? Follow me. Look at chapter 4, verse 19. Come follow me, Jesus said. And I'm going to send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets, and what did they do? They followed him. He sees 2 more fishermen. They're with their dad in the boat. And he calls them, and what do? Look at verse 22, chapter 4, verse 22. Immediately, they leave the boat and dad, and what do? They follow him. Then Jesus goes around the whole region, right? Itinerant teacher kind of thing. Teaching, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing, and then who's coming to him? So he's got fishermen in tow, right? It's like unlikely bunch of fishermen. And then who else is starting to follow Jesus now? What does it say? Look at verse 24. News about him spread, and what kinds of people are flocking to Jesus? Sick people, people whose bodies don't work, people with just pain and limbs that don't work, people who are oppressed by spiritual evil. They're called crazy, lunatics by everybody else. They're having seizures, paralyzed. And in this setting, this is Roman society. We thank them because the seedbed of whatever, democracy and that whole philosophy of politics, and more people had clean water than ever before because of the Romans and the aqueducts and the road system. And it was at the same time the most cutthroat society you can ever possibly imagine. And there's no welfare, there's no food stamps, right? There's no, if you are one of these people, where do you live? What part of town do you live? You live in the slums, and you are most certainly pushed to the absolute margins. You're poor, you're subsistence living, day labor, and these are the people Matthew makes it a point to tell us who flock to Jesus. And what do these crowds do? Look at verse 25 of chapter 4. These large crowds of all these sick, hurting, poor fishermen, farmers, day laborers, they flock to Jesus from all these regions. Crowds of them, from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, all across the Jordan. Among all these crowds, what are these sick, hurting people doing? What do they do? What's the last sentence of chapter 4? They follow him. So we have fishermen following Jesus, and he calls them. And then we have these crowds of sick, hurting people who, in the eyes of Roman society, they're the losers, they're the unimportant, the insignificant. They're the ones flocking to Jesus. And among those crowds, a whole bunch of those are following him too. And what's our question? To ask of the 9 blessings. What's our question? So, who's Jesus talking to, and in what setting? Chapter 5. When Jesus saw the crowds, and you now know who makes up those crowds, he went to a mountainside, and he sat down. His disciples came to him. Now, who's that? So I think when we see that word, if you're familiar with the Gospels, you might think, oh, the 12, right? He has these 12 close disciples. Now, does the circle of the 12 disciples exist yet? No, you're reading, this doesn't happen in chapter 10, right? So 4 of them are in tow now, the 4 fishermen, they're going to be part of the 12. But so who are the disciples? What's a disciple? Somebody who follows Jesus. Who's following Jesus? Loads of people. Loads of people. And primarily, Matthew says, what's the makeup of these disciples who are coming from the crowds? What's the makeup? I'm trying to overemphasize the point to make it crystal clear. Fishermen, sick, hurting, poor people. So you have Jesus on a mountainside, sits down, and he has just huge crowds of people who have come out of even larger crowds because they see something in Jesus and his good news of the kingdom. They're all in for him. And what does he say to a huge crowd of disciples who are unimportant and insignificant and hurting and sick and just scraping by? He says these 9 blessings. These 9 blessings. And in that setting, words like this, they're electric. That's what they are, right? Nobody's familiar with what Jesus is saying here. That they're hearing this good news of the kingdom for the first time, and it's positively electric what he's doing. And it's actually, I think it's really hard for us to recreate what that would have been like. To hear Jesus amidst all these crowds and to hear him say something like this. I don't know how to recreate it, but I'm going to try.
And he goes on a 20-minute thing without trying, so we're gonna do you see why I like this guy? It's like amazing. So that's who this is being told to, which gave me a completely different context, personally. So rather than us hashing through each of the Beatitudes, because we will I had all those slides, and I was like, this will never happen. So we're just going to go through kind of an overview and the way that, because it's all, a lot of it's paraphrased from him, but the way that those blessings, like, how is it that we should be interpreting those, right? Like, what does that actually mean for someone to be blessed when they're meek. What does this mean? So that's what we're going to do. Oops, I don't want to start that again. Okay, so this is probably a bit of an eye chart. Hopefully folks can see it somewhat. But what I did was kind of list like, here are the Beatitudes, and some of them you can kind of batch together. And then this would be sort of, you know, God is with you, God is for you, if you are demonstrating these characteristics. That's the phrase, the way I want you to think about this. And I'm wondering, just so I'm not talking the whole time, maybe someone would be willing to like read one and then we do the next one. Can I get a little hand? Can I get a hand? Hey, thanks, Steve.
The Beatitude, poor in spirit and meek. God is with you and for you if you are low in status and consider yourself uninfluential.
Jenny.
The Beatitude, mourn, hunger, and thirst for righteousness. God is with you and for you if you long viscerally to see right relationships in the world and are so bothered by injustice in the world that it grieves you.
So this to me actually helped a ton with the mourn part. So he's saying, are you mourning for how broken this world is? Like, do you, and there's a whole bit on what does thirst and hunger have to do with this? And the analogy was, if you're thirsty for something, like you need water, there is no other replacement, or you need a beverage, you viscerally are longing for that. So when he's talking about longing, hunger and thirst for righteousness, he's saying, are you so at your core just yearning and longing for righteousness to be happening within the world? And if it's not, does it grieve you? Are you mourning that? Okay, next. Anyone? Yep, Kirk.
Blessed and merciful. God is with you and for you if you act with care and compassion, notice the hurt of others, and do small things for people who need it, providing a preview of God's kingdom.
So are you seeing the big picture, but at the same time noticing when people around you are hurting and they're grieving? And are you taking the time to acknowledge that, do small acts of kindness, just connect with people? I think this one hit pretty hard for me because, you know, everyone's so busy and we're just plowing through life, and it's really easy to not actually see, let alone acknowledge the pain of others. So that's merciful. Who's next? Hey, Monica.
Blessed are the pure in heart. God is with you and for you if you don't care about prestige or being admired. You simply care about seeing God in the world, and you perform acts of mercy and love towards others.
So this one is, you know, are you doing the right thing? Are you trying to live out the characteristics of God, even when nobody's looking? You know, are you taking the time to do that? You don't care about being successful in your business and popular. It's more important for you to make sure that you're doing the right thing and that you're connecting with others. Two more. Hey, thanks.
Peacemakers, God is with you and for you if you don't care. Know that God loves right relationships, and insert yourself into conflict, seeking to love them both and to try to mediate to reach a reconciliation.
Bit of a mouthful. Thanks for taking that one.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's, you know, you're recognizing that there's conflict and knowing that this is not a right relationship when there is conflict. And are you attempting to help resolve that? And this isn't talking about, you know, I mean, I guess in extreme circumstances, this could be talking about a war zone. In my normal daily life, that's not the way I'm interpreting it. It's just what I know, maybe at work, and there's issues going on between two people and it's impacting them. Like, do I do anything about that? Because his goal is for reconciliation to happen. One more. Thanks, Rick.
Persecuted. God is misunderstand you and say evil against you.
And the actual specific, the specific example that was given in this one was, obviously there are lots of different denominations of Christianity and lots of different religions across the world. And this is, are you willing to say, I'm a Christian, even though there's frequently people will immediately interpret that as the worst version of Christianity you've ever heard of and seen, and followed on the news, etc. And so even if you're going to be persecuted for that, are you still like, this is who I am, this is the core of who I am? So that's the Beatitudes. How do we do? Is that kind of helpful in going through that? Okay. All right. So notice how it wasn't 9 slides? Because it was. Okay, so the question that I want y'all to ponder is, what can you do to live these characteristics more intentionally? So it's one thing to be aware of them, but just like we talked about the outward and the inward, how do you take these and actually like sit on them and marinate on them and think about what would this look like if I was living this on a daily basis, knowing that we have all the peace and forgiveness on our side, right? So progress. Okay, second reading, I gave this one to Monica.
This is Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven.
Thank you. So the calling we've been given is be the salt and be the light. So what is salt? Salt by itself is sort of just salt, but it really becomes useful when it's mixed with other things. So salt adds taste and flavor. So again, be the salt. Think about, are you adding flavor to the world? Salt hinders decay. It preserves meat and fish, especially back then, right? So what we're saying here is, that the ask is engage with others, mix with others, because salt is by itself is not reaching its full potential. This requires community involvement, interacting with others. And then light, when you're internalizing these characteristics, this changes your character and your priorities, and it impacts people around you. And when we think of the light also, the example given here was the sun and the moon. The moon is lit because it's reflecting off of the sun. So we are to be reflective light, secondary light. We're only as bright as Christ's reflection off of us. So that's the light. Now I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing, yet again, I will run out of time. So Jim, can you come up? And I realized I gave you verse 33, it's actually verse 34.
I'm sorry.
It's verse 34, not 33, because I gave you verse 33.
You gave me 5:17 tonight.
I did, so you're gonna go ahead and read that. You knew that. I gave Sarah, and Sarah, you'll be doing 34 next.
Do you want 33 and 34? Just 34. Okay. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Matthew 5:17 through 19. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
Thank you. And I forgot the question to ponder here. So back to salt and light for 2 seconds. The question to ask yourself is, are you living a low sodium, low wattage life? Or, like salt, are you helping others maximize their potential? And light, are you reflecting God's light in the world? Then Jim did his reading. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so this is the section on the contrast, and there's sort of 2 slides on this. And I guess for me, like the "you've heard, but I say" is kind of the piece that sticks with me, and that's what Jim was speaking to. Is he's saying, Jesus is saying, I'm not coming here to abolish the laws, and the laws, what they're talking about is what was going on, you know, the commandments, everything that was kind of written in stone, literally, in the Old Testament. But what he's focusing on in all of these kind of contrast statements is, you've heard it said, do this. What I'm saying is, change yourself from the inside out, because if you're thinking through things from a place of love and compassion, the actions are going to take care of themselves. Okay, so don't murder, duh. But if you're angry, you're letting yourself get worked up to that point. So even though you may not be acting on it, you're still experiencing that kind of disruption in your life. So basically what he's saying here is there's more to pleasing God than controlling how we act. Like, it's not a checklist, right? Like, I'm not gonna do these 10 things in my 10 commandments and I'm golden. He's saying our thoughts, motives, desires, and appetites betray a reality that the behavior modification cannot cure. Jesus radically transformed believers to obey from the heart, and we begin to look at life with God's interests in mind. So generosity, humbling ourselves, and serving others become the highest values. What can we do for others? How can we serve others? So things to ponder. Are you following a checklist of actions in your Christian life? Or are you seeking to get your inward heart right? Second part of the contrast is what they're calling authentic spirituality. And this is the, basically, don't go out there and do a bunch of stuff just to be seen. What is your real internal intent behind what you're doing? So are you doing true acts of gratitude? Don't help someone because of how it looks. I think it's hilarious actually that I gave you the reading right after this, which says don't pray theatrically. Is what's up here. I didn't plan that. So it's don't pray theatrically, find a quiet place and pray simply. If you're doing it for show, you're not doing it for the right reasons in all of these things. So ask yourself, what are your motives? Are your acts of piety, and that would be offering, prayers, etc., are your acts of piety done for the recognition of others, or are you genuinely expressing gratitude for gifts that God has given you? You know what? So I'm going to let you read from your seat because you can boom it out.
So, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today.
Thank you. Best reading of the day. So around not worrying, and that these are the gist here, because I'm like completely running out of time, is that on your conduct. Okay, so the things you'll remember here is you can't serve two masters, right? Your possessions. You will seek what you value most, and this hit hard for me, hardcore, because I overwork all of the time, and I was like, guess the mirror's up, because I'm doing apparently what I value the most. You cannot serve two masters. On judging others, this is the whole plank in the eye phrase. So examine yourself before you condemn others. Self-righteousness and criticism always cloud spiritual vision. And regarding prayer, ask, seek, and knock. God wants the best for you. What you want may not be the best for you. That's a hard one to hear. And then on others, here's the golden rule, folks. The golden rule, do to others as you would have them do to you. So conduct. Can't serve two masters. Look in the mirror before you start judging somebody else. Trust and pray and recognize that maybe what you're getting isn't what you want, but it's still the best for you. And then do unto others as they've done unto you. So the question here is, does your daily conduct put Jesus' teachings into practice? Okay, Brenda, you're up.
Brenda, Matthew 7:24-27. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall.
Close second there. That was good. So this one is the counterfeits. Okay, so there's it's actually, I have the least amount on this, and great, because I'm running out of time. But this is really like the things of be weary of this, right? There's a hard road you can take, there's an easy road you can take. Usually the easy road, there's a reason it's easy. It's going to take you down a path you probably don't want to be going in. So it's choose, and most importantly, you will build that discernment as you continue to build on the characteristics that God is seeking for you. So taking the hard road. There's going to be true and false prophets. A lot of this is the whole, cult situation. So, if someone is asking you for something, that's not probably the direction to be going. But anyways, keeping in mind and discernment. True and false disciples. The wise and foolish builder, which would be the building your house on rock, which would be probably the most common one that people know. So the thing to think about here is, what do you need to do to shore up your foundation? Okay, so questions for reflection. See if we can guess what they are. And then these are just things to think about. It's all those 5 questions I just asked you. So we're just gonna read them again. So, coming out of this, what can you do to live the characteristics of the Beatitudes more intentionally? Are you helping others maximize their potential? Are you reflecting God's light in the world? Or are you living a low sodium, low voltage life? There we go. Are you seeking to get your inward heart right? Or are you following a checklist of actions in your Christian life? What are your motives? Are your acts of piety done for the recognition of others, or are you genuinely expressing gratitude for the gifts God has given you? Does your daily conduct put Jesus' teachings into practice? And finally, what do you need to do to shore up your foundation? So I'm going to say again, this is 4 pages in the Bible. This is an easy read, folks. But I'll tell you, once you start going into the pool, to talk about the deep end is deep. There's a lot going on here. So anyways, hope this was helpful. Thanks, everyone.